Okay, we're live.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Snyder. I'm the Director of Community Development for the City of Indio. This time I'm going to turn it over to Miguel Luna. Miguel?
Thank you so much, Kevin. Buenas noches a todos. Gracias por acompañarnos esta noche. Si está alguien en la audiencia que de casualidad necesita traducción en español, por favor, este es el momento de dejarnos saber para darle instrucciones cómo hacer eso. Let's wait 20 seconds, Kevin. Otra vez, si hay alguien en la audiencia que de casualidad necesita traducción en español, por favor, si me deja saber usando la utilidad de preguntas y respuestas, y con mucho gusto le damos instrucciones.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third community meeting for the Highway 111 Corridor Specific Plan. This planning process started earlier in the year, and we have been working with members of the community, our city council, our planning commission, to develop a new vision for the Highway 111 corridor from Jefferson Street to Indio Boulevard. As I said, this is our third community meeting. We are excited to update you with some additional information, thoughts, and ideas. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Peter Vanderwall with Sargent Town Planning, and he's going to help explain what we've been working on and the thoughts and ideas. So Peter, please take it over and share the information that you have.
Will do. Thanks, Kevin. Before I start, I'm just looking at the participation list. I believe we only have one member of the community. Would it be prudent to wait a few minutes and see if anybody else joins us, or shall we just jump in?
Miguel, what are your thoughts?
I'm looking at, we also have Facebook, so
Okay.
I just want to make sure folks are on Facebook. And so I say we go, and people will join.
All right. Okay, well, as Kevin said, this is the third community workshop for the Indio 111 corridor specific plan. A quick summary of our agenda for this evening. So we've spent a lot of time since the second community workshop developing new concepts and information that we plan to share with you. We're going to spend a little bit of time just recapping the purpose and the goals of the 111 corridor specific plan, a brief summary of the community outreach that's been completed to date, touching on our current status with the specific plan, timing, and what the next steps are. Then the bulk of the presentation tonight is going to be sharing a number of new opportunities that our team has been studying over the past several months since we spoke to you all last. Really, where we're at now, and I'll get into this in a moment, is we're ready to make the first draft of the specific plan. So this is really an opportunity to give the community a snapshot of the contents, the opportunities that the plan is going to be describing and enabling, and really to confirm that vision with the community. And then at the end of the presentation, Sherry from our consultant team will be sharing a brief snapshot on some of the near and long-term economic projections as a framework for some of the economic possibilities and realities of this plan. So brief introductions of our team. I'm Peter Vanderwall, Managing Principal of Sargent Town Planning. My partner, David Sargent, our Senior Principal, is on tonight's meeting as well. We'll be joined by Sherry from Bay Area Economics in a short while. Bay Area Economics are the prime consultant of this team. They're focused on, again, the economics of the plan, and Sargent Town Planning is focused on urban design. We'll be putting together the specific plan itself and the development standards that will implement it. David Greensfelder from Greensfelder Associates is our retail economist. He's not joining us tonight. We'll also have on our team civil engineers, local civil engineers, MSA Consulting. We have Miguel from Urban Transect, who is helping us with outreach in this process. And then Farron Piers has a small role in this project, working on the transportation analysis related to the plan. And Recon Associates are working on the environmental review process of the plan. So just a brief recap for anybody that's unfamiliar. So this generally represents the specific plan area within the boundaries of the city of Indio. So basically the entire length of the 111 corridor as it goes through the city, with many either undeveloped or opportune for underdeveloped parcels on the north and south sides of the corridor. And this plan will be looking at providing a vision for what might happen within this area, and then provide new zoning that will ultimately implement that vision. So why a corridor specific plan and why now? So the recently adopted 2040 general plan describes a very visionary future for the Highway 111 corridor. It provides, it articulates a variety of outcomes expected along the 111 corridor. And the city now needs an updated set of tools to implement that vision. And that's what this plan will do. Indio has received funding from the state of California through an SB2 grant to adopt and implement plans and process improvements that will streamline the development of new housing to respond to the city's current and future housing needs. And then finally, several property owners and investors are currently planning and proposing new development along the corridor. So the timing of this plan is an opportune time to organize and shape these investments based on the community values and priorities. So just as a brief summary of the outreach that's been conducted to date. So again, this is community workshop number 3. The second community workshop was held back in September. Prior to that, we met with Planning Commission and Council in June. We also had a first community workshop back in June. And throughout the process of this plan, which really kicked off earlier this year, there's been ongoing community surveys, both online. There's been a couple that have been done at the swap meet, and we've been engaging with key stakeholders, as I mentioned, some of the developers and investors that are interested in sites along the corridor throughout this process. So it's been a very engaged and iterative process between our team, the city, and the community. And in terms of the specific plan timing, so we, as I mentioned, we're currently working on the first administrative review draft of the specific plan. We're hoping and expecting that will be complete by January or February of 2022. After staff review of that plan, that will be followed by a public review draft that will be available in March or April of 2022. And we're targeting a final specific plan and adoption by either May or June of 2022. So through the community outreach that's been done to date, a number of key themes have emerged. A summary of those are the following. So enhance the appearance and the quality of the 111 corridor's public realm to improve India's regional identity and to promote more activity along the corridor, to promote and deliver new types of housing that offer a variety of lifestyle choices, amenities, and price points to residents, encourage commercial development that creates jobs for and provides amenities to India's residents, create more nice places to go and fun things to do within India. So we've heard, there are many competing cities in the Coachella Valley, and there's an opportunity for this plan to really start to create concentrations of activity within the city that can hopefully draw more and more visitors and shoppers and residents from the greater region. And then finally, improve efficiency and predictability for developers and investors. That can be done with clear development standards and streamlined approval processes. So, as I mentioned, one of the intentions of the 111 corridor specific plan is to implement the intentions that have been described in the 2040 general plan. So what are those intentions? Well, the general plan describes a series of place types, which is another word for general plan land use designations, for all of the properties throughout the city, but those that are within the specific plan boundaries are the following on the screen. So connective neighborhoods, mixed use neighborhoods. There's a special designations for Midtown, which is centered around the Indio Marketplace, and special designation for downtown. We recently completed a downtown specific plan that was recently adopted, and then some workplace industrial designations for the east side of the city, and public and institutional, which would be represented by the Riverside County Fairgrounds and Justice Center. So within the general plan, again, it describes key attributes and outcomes for each of these place types. I won't go into detail of them, but again, some of those are Midtown, or some of those designations are mixed use neighborhoods, connected neighborhoods, Midtown, public institutional, and workplace and employment districts. Within those, as you can see on these sample spreads from the general plan, some of the attributes that the general plan describes are things like allowed land uses, allowed development intensities, really quantified by building density, and then commercial FAR, which are really measuring tools and not necessarily prescriptive of the types of forms and characteristics of buildings. So there's an opportunity for the 111 corridor specific plan to provide even more instructive development standards related to private buildings. It also describes attributes about the public realm, such as streetscape, connectivity, open space types, and then very general ideas on building form and character. The general plan also has a number of land use goals that are very instructive and informative to the 111 corridor specific plan. We've gone through those in previous meetings in detail, but a paraphrased version of some of the placemaking priorities that the general plan describes that will be priorities of this plan include developing a citywide urban structure that provides multimodal, meaning walking, biking, transit connectivity throughout the city, that supports new development types and intensities envisioned for the future of India, and that connects and weaves areas of new growth with some of the established neighborhoods. It creates a walkable human scale public realm network with active and comfortable community gathering spaces that encourage activity and social interaction. To plan and establish new mixed use neighborhoods and centers that provide a variety of housing and lifestyle choices and provide opportunities for shopping, recreation, commerce, employment, arts, and culture within close proximity to each other. And finally, strengthen and establish new workplace and employment districts that provide space for industrial, manufacturing, office, research, and development within close proximity to new and existing housing. We think there's a big opportunity that the Riverside Justice Center offers in terms of there being a concentration of potential new supportive office uses around those facilities. We're also going to explore and show an example of a smaller version of a workplace industrial district on the east side of town in one of the opportunity sites that we'll go through a little later this evening. So based on the direction of the general plan, based on the things that we've heard from the community, our intention is to prepare a 111 corridor specific plan that will be implementation focused. It'll provide clear and effective tools and processes for delivering the 2040 general plan, plan's vision, as well as the community's vision that we've heard in this process for the corridor. It'll focus on new housing and commercial development opportunities along the corridor. It'll establish well-connected land use patterns along the corridor that will accommodate that can and will accommodate market-driven changes and evolving community needs and priorities over time. It'll prioritize placemaking, delivering projects that add amenity-rich neighborhoods and centers for more people. And it'll create a visually strong corridor identity. The general plan uses the term Boulevard 111, and we'll talk about that in more detail a little later. And a sense of arrival into Indio. And finally, a plan that synthesizes visionary planning and design, thorough market study, rigorous economic analysis, and meaningful community input. So I'm going to pause there. That was a lot of words. And really the question at the moment is simply, are these generally the right priorities and outcomes for the 111 corridor specific plan to focus on?
And Peter, just want to also invite, I know we have someone on Facebook as well. So if there's any questions from the Facebook attendees, please feel free to type it there and we'll monitor that as well. I don't see any questions or thoughts popping up on the Q&A from Zoom.
Okay.
So just want to let you know that.
Great. All right. Then I will move on. So the first and really the bulk of the presentation tonight is starting to go through and share with you all some of the priorities and opportunities that we've been exploring since the last community workshop for the corridor. So we've talked about this in past workshops, basically a very simple and very diagrammatic organization of how we're thinking about the corridor as a series of segments, nodes, and centers. So obviously there's the 111 corridor proper. We have the downtown, for which we've recently done a downtown specific plan. Midtown has been described in great detail in the general plan, anchored by the Indio Marketplace, as well as the JFK Medical Center. East and west gateways. So priorities there will be establishing strong, clear entries into the city and into the corridor. The East Corridor, which is really the segment corridor that links the East Gateway to downtown and to Midtown. And then the West Corridor, linking the West Gateway to Midtown. And then along it, really thinking about a corridor as a series of places, a series of centers or activity nodes. So the first one we're going to start with tonight is the West Gateway. And in all of these, I'm going to describe placemaking priorities and then talk about some of the opportunities that we've been looking at. So the main priorities for the West Corridor would be to establish a strong corridor identity and gateway through streetscape and public realm improvements, and then support and grow some of the existing attractions and amenities. So the West Gateway is anchored by the iconic Shield State Garden and Jackalope Ranch, and we think there's an opportunity to build on the success of those destinations and really grow a strong node on the west side of the city. So we've talked about this in a previous workshop, but so these are just a series of images of the 111 corridor as you're traveling east throughout some of the desert cities. So in general, I mean, the 111 corridor through the desert is an attractive place in terms of the public realm, but there's really nothing identifying, distinguishing it from one community to the other, and really no sense of differentiation in terms of what city you're in or where you are along it. And then boom, when you hit the city of Indio at the West Gateway, immediately you're met by Shield State Garden and Jackalope Ranch is across the street. And we think there's a big opportunity to leverage the success of both of those attractions. So this is the south side of 111 of Shield State Garden. So a very prominent date grove along the corridor, and of course that was the history of the city, and we think that there's an opportunity to carry that history forward into some of the streetscape and branding and elements of the corridor's identity moving forward. So one thought we have, and we've shared this in the past, this is an image of Arroyo Parkway in Pasadena that also its main streetscape attribute is the date palms on it. These are actually harvested, and we think there could be an opportunity potentially to partner with Shield Date Garden and the corridor, in addition to really being made beautiful by these very prominent palms, could actually be a living and farmed amenity to the city. You could potentially close off a lane of travel, and harvesting could be done early in the morning or off-peak travel times. At gateways, it could be an opportunity for strong gateway corridor branding elements. Really focusing on light and color. And then moving right into the west side of the corridor, or the west corridor. So the placemaking priorities here would be subdivision of large vacant parcels into a connective framework network, establishing neighborhood serving activity centers at key nodes, improving the streetscape. So really evolving the corridor from a highway that is cutting through the town into a boulevard that is connective, and really connecting the north and south sides of the corridor into a unified place. That includes the addition, particularly on the west corridor, of new signalized intersections, so that you're creating new opportunities to cross the corridor, and nodes around which activity centers and concentrations of commercial might be viable. Creating an appropriate transition from the corridor to the surrounding neighborhoods, and then establishing a series of active, vibrant, and amenity-rich neighborhoods on both sides. So we talked about this previously, and this is really a framework for how the specific plan will approach zoning and development regulations. And we're thinking about that as really a transition from the corridor where things could be more intense toward the neighborhoods where development in terms of intensity and scale would taper down in relation to the single family neighborhoods that are to the north and to the south. And then along the corridor, again, getting a series of activity nodes, commercial nodes, and mixed use centers. So you're muted.
I'm sorry. This is David Jordan. I was just going to add that those centers have the opportunity to be successful by virtue of getting customers from people who are just coming through on 111, and customers in the new neighborhoods that would be able to walk or bike to them, and customers from all the adjoining neighborhoods to the north and south who would have new opportunities to shop dine, meet friends, neighbors, family near their homes, to make very active spots along the corridor. That was all.
So one of the things that we've done since the last workshops, we've expanded on that basic concept, and have now illustrated that as applied to an urban framework plan for various parts of the corridor. So currently the west end of the corridor is characterized by a lot of very large vacant parcels with some highway-oriented development on it. So what the plan would describe would be a mechanism for subdividing those large areas into an urban network of complete streets and public realm network that could then accommodate new types of development.
And one more interjection, please. When we say urban in this context, we mean a pattern, a town pattern, like the original patterns of downtown Indio and the early neighborhoods adjacent to downtown. We don't mean urban like a big city. We just mean a town pattern where you can walk around and visit things.
Yep. And really that structure is what's key, because whether near-term development, whether the market's ready to deliver intense urban forms on this part of the corridor in the near term, or whether it's more likely to deliver some more of the kind of highway-oriented uses, particularly commercial uses. Either can be accommodated by this urban network, and establishing it from the onset doesn't prevent the types of more urban patterns from arriving later when the market's ready to deliver them.
And the absence of a framework like this pretty much guarantees that you're going to get shopping centers right along the corridor with walls behind them, such that if you ever build housing back there later, you won't be able to get to the shopping centers without driving on 111. So it's very important to set up this more permeable circulation network from the start, so that the shopping centers get built in ways that still enable housing that's built behind them later to come access them very beautifully and directly. Or if the housing is built first in those lighter yellow areas, the framework of access is already set up so that there will be sites that commercial development could occur on later along the highway. So it ends up being sort of agnostic as to the order in which the pieces show up, because they've been organized by this frame.
So while this looks like a very resolved plan, this is merely an illustration of the subdivision standards. So this is one way that some of these sites could be organized, but this is certainly not prescriptive of the block structure that would need to be applied to the segment of the corridor. And this one does take into account the location of some of the existing buildings. So again, all of these are simply illustrations of the types of patterns that the development standards of the plan are intended to require. So then in terms of the zoning framework, as I mentioned, most intense uses and patterns would be located and allowed along 111 proper, and then the zoning would require that as development approaches and transitions toward the neighborhoods, that would be in forms and patterns that were less intense and more compatible with the single family housing to the north and to the south. So this is an illustration that we've shown in the past, done by colleagues of ours. It's called the Urban Transect. So basically it's describing how you can transition from single family, very low intense development types like single family housing, all the way up to very urban scale buildings, really describing that there are a variety of what are called missing middle types in between. So these are neighborhood scale multifamily residential and mixed use building patterns, building types and development patterns that appropriately transition between environments.
And the development if we go back to that just real quick, the development standards will ensure that the houses on the far left can't end up with one of those big buildings over there on the right next door to it. They would require that 1 or 2 clicks bigger than a house is okay next to a house, but 3 or 4 or 5 clicks bigger is not. And the standards will be clear about that.
So we made this illustration. This is simply a cross-section drawing of the types of forms and patterns that might be permitted in that corridor adjacent zone and how that would transition down toward the existing neighborhoods through zoning. And that might either be by unique zones or with specific zoning or overlays that require adjacency that would provide adjacency standards for transitions down toward single family housing. Gone through these in the past, just very quickly, just a summary of the types of forms that the types of patterns and forms that might be appropriate within some of these neighborhoods. So really ranging from small lot single family housing up to neighborhood scale multifamily buildings, neighborhood scale mixed use and commercial buildings that could be located at some of the centers, and then up to some of the stronger corridor fronting development types that might be appropriate at some of the key nodes and centers. In terms of the public realm character and elements, so the 111, obviously the goals for the 111 corridor itself are to evolve the corridor from a tear through the urban fabric, as we mentioned before, into a zipper, something that weaves both sides together. We've looked at some of these illustrations before, so we'll go through them quickly, but here's the existing condition. Very large vacant parcels really on both sides of the corridor through the west part of it. And ideas about how with organized streetscape improvements and with urban scale buildings, the corridor could really evolve and have a very different look and feel to it, and really enjoy enclosure, some of the enclosure that would be offered by some of the streetscape and building elements. So some of the key attributes, as we mentioned before, date palms and native landscaping, street lighting, furnishing, public art, are creating a unified corridor identity. New signalized intersections at key nodes, making the corridor much more crossable for residents of the neighborhoods to the east or to the north and to the south. So they're not always having to get into their car to go and enjoy some of these amenities that could start to populate the corridor. And then again, corridor fronting development. So new buildings built at or close to the street. In some cases, that might also include curbside parking. That might happen, and the plan will describe a variety of strategies for accommodating that. Certainly to make corridor fronting commercial successful, it would be helpful to have on-street parking. So whether that was provided on the private frontage of the building itself, or within the curb-to-curb dimension of the corridor, would require some further study. And then opportunities for multimodal facilities, bike lanes, potentially transit lanes in the future. And then another option that we've been exploring is looking at adding slip frontage lanes along the front of the corridor. So that would be another way for development to get curbside parking in front of it and really create a very strong, attractive, safe, comfortable frontage, in front, so that customers, diners, and the like could enjoy the environment along the corridor. And then just to show that we're not only thinking about very urban and potentially long-term outcomes for the corridor, the plan will also describe that in the nearer term, there are strategies for really accomplishing the same outcomes in terms of a unifying public realm character, with new buildings that are fronting the corridor and fitting into that urban framework, but might be more realistic in terms of what the market is able to deliver in the near term. And these could be accommodated in that same basic urban block framework, and the plan will describe phasing of some of these outcomes over time. Then in terms of how some of these neighborhoods become organized, another important element will be establishing neighborhood boulevards or crosstown connectors. And really, these would be the places where you'd prioritize multimodal circulation. So bike routes, transit routes, and really the main point being that these create crosstown connection opportunities that don't require that all those trips go on 111, which might also free up some of the travel demands on 111 to even further enable some of the transformations that might really help support new development and just increase the value of new development along the corridor. So here's an illustration of what some of those boulevards could look like. So again, unifying streetscape, landscape medians, parkways, planters, provide attractive and comfortable public realm, opportunities for public art and medians and parkways. And on the boulevards themselves, having vertical elements like tall palms can signify just visually what those prominent crosstown connections are, and really help with navigation for pedestrians and cyclists. And then again, street fronting development. So the boulevards would be directly fronted onto by new buildings, and with active frontages, and then supported by on-street parking. And then again, opportunities for multimodal circulation, like bike and transit lanes on some of these boulevards. And then the network would be completed, or the framework would be completed by a local street and paseo network. So some of these larger areas then get broken down into more urban scale walkable blocks by a series of neighborhood streets. And those streets could look something like this, again, with unifying landscape characteristics. Landscape parkways and planters provide a very comfortable public realm and add a lot of value to the development that would front it. Buildings would have active frontages, which add safety to the public realm by providing eyes in the street. Buildings would be entered directly from local streets and paseos. And then on-street parking again for residents and visitors. And then that urban framework would be completed by other connections like residential paseos, commercial paseos, and a variety of open space types, neighborhood parks, plazas, etc. So I will pause there. And then just like the last question, so these generally represent the types of opportunities that the plan should envision and enable for the West Corridor and Gateway.
Peter, and I'm monitoring. I don't see any questions. I did see one comment earlier on that said a priority should be safety. So I just wanted to pass that along to you.
Great. All right, I shall continue.
Yeah, that's always a top priority of everything we do, and the several dimensions of safety that which is of course the foundation of any place that people want to live, is that it's very safe and comfort. It would be, the goal is that it would be very safe and comfortable to walk around, bike around, and drive around, and that all of the spaces that you would be moving through, whether you were walking, driving, or biking, would be spaces that would have other people in them, and that would have people in the buildings looking out into those streets, so that they have what is known as eyes on the street. That's what makes places safe, is to have them be lived in. And that's the goal here, is to have all the common spaces be places that people spend time in just because they like to be there, which makes them very, very safe.
All right, so now we're going to hop over to the other side of the corridor, so East Corridor and Gateway. So some of the placemaking priorities here, again, establish a strong corridor identity and downtown Gateway from the east. I think there's some opportunities for small neighborhood scale infill with a variety of appropriate housing and commercial types. Opportunities for workplace and employment types that may not be best suited to downtown, but within close proximity of it. We'll show you some examples of that in a minute. And then support and strengthen the success of downtown and the office and employment district that's could be anchored by the Riverside County facilities in the Larson Justin Center. So this is a quick diagram as you're approaching and entering the corridor from the east. The future passenger rail station that is planned to be arriving just adjacent downtown is here. We think there's an opportunity within the neighborhoods just on the east side of Jackson for small scale neighborhood supportive or downtown supportive infill. We think this location just off of Indio Boulevard could be an opportunity for potential workplace and live work or arts district. And then you have a lot of existing, a lot of auto oriented and light industrial uses on the east end of the corridor that we think are great and could be supported. They could be potentially evolved and grown over time. So the first area that we're going to look at is this segment of kind of old downtown neighborhoods just east of Jackson Street. So here's an aerial of the existing conditions. And then we've just made a simple illustration of how, particularly on these blocks along Salton Street and Flower Street, there's a number of vacant and or somewhat underutilized parcels that could be great opportunities for infill development. So here's a quick diagram of some of those opportunities. We think, so this is Golf Center Parkway, the overpass that connects to 111. So as you're coming over that from the east, you have a great view into the downtown. The current fabric is fairly blank. So one idea that we explored, there could be an opportunity to establish a smaller scale date garden attraction off of Indio Boulevard that could really create some visual prominence as you're going over the overpass. You know, that might have a little roadside cafe, and this could become just a small attraction that could start to anchor this area and really add a lot of beauty to it. This little triangular parcel could be developed into a neighborhood serving park, particularly if you start to get some multifamily development or housing types infilling into this neighborhood. It could be a great amenity for them. RECWA obviously is a very important connection into the downtown and could really, with some of the streetscape improvements that we've described in the downtown plan and in the general plan, could become an important connector of this neighborhood to the downtown. And then some of the neighborhood streets could incrementally be improved. So as some of these parcels start to redevelop, their frontage contributions could start to really evolve the character of some of these neighborhood streets. So, then we've illustrated a variety of neighborhood scale multifamily opportunities that could include side yard houses, courtyard housing, and even some small scale, small lot single family housing types. There could also be an opportunity for new commercial infill along the edge of 111 in some of these parcels. And just a number of businesses within this area, existing businesses that with some small facade improvements could really gain a lot of value, particularly as downtown starts to gain traction and add value to everything around it. So the second area that we looked at is this large vacant area just south of the mobile home park on Calhoun Street. And we think there's an opportunity that this could evolve into a very cool kind of workplace employment district that could also include some housing. So here it is. It's a very large vacant piece. And we just made a simple site plan of how new network could be inserted into that space. It's a tricky site, but taking advantage of and kind of in relation to a lot of the highway oriented industrial uses on Indio Boulevard, this portion of the plan might continue some of the office industrial maker space in on a small new little street and centered around a new neighborhood green. And those buildings might be something like this, or maybe more industrial, less industrial. Those could be offices. Really, there's a number of outcomes of the buildings, but we think within a simple urban pattern like this, a lot of different types of development could be accommodated. And then there could be an opportunity for live work or artist lofts as well. So this could really start to establish as a worker workplace, a very unique worker workplace district. And again, within this area, maybe some of the types of uses that wouldn't be appropriate in downtown proper could be located in a location like this within very close proximity to the downtown. And then, the potential even for a little neighborhood store or cafe that could be an amenity to the mobile home park to the north, some of the multifamily housing to the east, and then any of the workers or residents of this new neighborhood. Then a third priority, support and evolve some of the existing businesses along 111 and Indio Boulevard. Support and add value to these businesses via public realm improvements, adaptive reuse, and even some infill development. So just a collection of images of adaptive reuse of former industrial and or auto-oriented uses as the corridor evolves over time, as downtown begins to gain traction. This could be an important and very unique part of the city that could offer a variety of different business opportunities and attractions. And then finally, create a strong corridor identity and link to downtown. Here's currently 111, basically across from the Justice Center and on the downtown edge where you have some large vacant parcels, and an illustration of how, again, in the future over time, how this could really start to intensify and formalize as a very strong downtown edge and employment district, again, anchored by the Riverside County facilities, Justice Center, and downtown uses. With very prominent street fronting development, unifying streetscape elements, convenient on-street parking. All right, so we'll pause here again. I expect that we're not going to have a lot of questions, but same question. So do these generally represent the types of opportunities that the plan should envision and enable for the East Corridor and Gateway?
Not so much a question, but I do have a comment from Facebook saying, I know this can be successful. Lived in Pasadena and saw the West Colorado area full of abandoned historic buildings turn into a thriving living and shopping community. This will be great for Indio. This is from Lupe Gonzalez, who's monitoring us on Facebook. So there's your
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lupe.
We
also
have a comment in our Q&A on Zoom from Brent McManigal. The idea of a date grove next to Golf Center on India Boulevard is a great idea. It's near the new TKB shop. Can it be explored to relocate some of the abandoned date trees that exist along the corridor? There are some in the Midtown district to jumpstart the date industry.
Oh, cool. And as I'm sure the person who offered that comment knows, palm trees are the easiest type of big tree to move. There's several companies around that just do that. Thank you.
All right, then I will jump into the final section that we're going to look at. And again, we have less illustrations of Midtown tonight because we wanted to focus on the West and the East. And really the West is because it represents all or mostly all new development. It's really prototypical of the types of interventions that could happen anywhere along the corridor, really with regard to some of the streetscape and public realm improvements, and with regard to our zoning framework of scaling intensity down away from the corridor. So that's why there's the most visualizations of the West Corridor, but many of those elements are typological and could be applied elsewhere within the plan area. So placemaking priorities for Midtown and Gateway: repair and complete a connective framework network between the existing highway-oriented commercial uses and within some of the large vacant parcels. That's probably the most challenging in Midtown, just because of the amount of existing development here and the types and patterns of that existing development, as well as ownership patterns. But we have some ideas of how that could be done in a very coherent and organized way. Next, strengthen the Indio Marketplace and JFK Medical Center identities as regional destinations and their own unique districts. Infill large and underutilized parcels with a variety of uses, including new housing choices within close proximity to the numerous amenities of Midtown and downtown. And finally, evolve, like elsewhere, evolve the corridor from a highway boulevard, a highway to a boulevard. So again, that concept of repairing it, evolving it from the highway that's cutting through to the boulevard that's stitching together. So here is the existing development patterns in Midtown. And just like we illustrated in the West Corridor, the priority of weaving in a complete street and public realm network. So in Midtown, that means reorganizing some of the existing suburban commercial patterns into a more urban connective network of complete streets and public spaces to provide multimodal circulation and valuable street addresses for new development. And again, that same basic zoning framework where you have more intensity along the corridor and transitioning toward the neighborhoods to the north and to the south. And again, this is just an illustration of a conceptual organization of this area into an urban pattern of blocks, streets, and public spaces, not intended to be the plan or prescriptive of exactly how these areas would be subdivided over time. As we mentioned, the Indian Marketplace planning is already underway to evolve the current mall into a more modern and active lifestyle commercial center that will be supported by new multifamily neighborhoods to the south of it. So we've spoken with the owners of the mall and have been working with them in terms of the types and patterns of development that the plan is intending to prescribe to help that investment that is impending really be the first step at delivering some of the patterns in this important part of the city. And then this is just a series of illustrations of development and public realm types and characteristics that could really populate this area. So, you know, a variety of very active open space types, development types, and that provide a lot of amenities to the residents. Again, very active mixed use buildings and centers, multifamily housing in perhaps more urban forms in Midtown and along the downtown edges, and potentially some smaller scale typologies as you move away from the corridor. So that's all I have for illustrations of the opportunities that we've been exploring to date. We will, and the plan will describe more of the types of opportunities that we discussed tonight for the east and the west corridors. So those will be reflected in the final or the next draft of the plan that we're working on. But really, a lot of our work has been focused on the east and the west most recently. So
here I have and Brent, I see your comment, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Brent, who's been very diligently following the meeting, to allow him to speak so he could do that. So Brent, you'll get a message on your end. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. My name is Brent McManigal. I'm a resident of Indio. Been here about 2 years, but I've been associated in doing business in Indio for close to 30 years. I'm also a land use attorney with some development projects in the city. And this is very refreshing to see and encouraging. I think there are a lot of great ideas. One of the questions that I have is, I know you mentioned Jackalope originally, but unfortunately we see that it appears to be closed. Hopefully they can reopen after things get better, as they are.
Mm-hmm.
But will the specific plan, my specific question, and I've got a couple of clients asking me, is whether the specific plan will include some approval processes that streamline the process, meaning it's not so arduous to get a high density development approved in the Midtown district. And they can streamline it as long as they meet the development standards that will be prepared in the specific plan.
That is exactly what we were chatting about right before we started this workshop. And the answer is yes. The city's approach to the downtown plan, which we were pleased to have the opportunity to work on with them as well, and was adopted a year or so ago, has such provisions. And it's we hear that they're being well received. And yes, that's the intention here. This type of plan, which we've made many of over the years, is intended to clarify the types of development, the types of reinvestment, the types of built outcomes that the city would welcome, thus enabling the city to straightforwardly approve projects that meet that expressed intention. There's so many California cities that have for so long relied on so arduous and sometimes unclear discretionary review processes where a developer brings in a proposal and they think about it and they say, well, no, try again. And it ends up being very slow and very expensive. So the intention here is specifically to increase the chances that the city will get the kind of a corridor they want, and that individual developers will be able to do it in a more efficient, straightforward way by virtue of the time and money that the city is investing in clarifying what the general plan envisions for this corridor.
Yeah, this is Kevin. I'm just going to put an exclamation point on what David just said. So our interest is very much in providing that expedited entitlement process. David mentioned the downtown plan. The work on that we worked with David and Peter and the rest of their team on resulted in being CEQA cleared, meaning there's no extraordinary CEQA reviews, which is a huge time saver. And we committed to a 90-day or less review timeframe from a complete application, which is in California is pretty much unheard of. So we have already processed one project under that, and we have a lot of growing interest in our downtown, in part because of the fact that it is a streamlined entitlement process. So very much like what we did in the downtown, we have the same goal with the Highway 111 corridor specific plan, is to provide that streamlined entitlement process to spur new investment and reinvestment in properties.
I really appreciate hearing that. Working in several other cities, it's so difficult, and I look forward to seeing this plan come together.
Thank you, Brent, for your comments.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate you being here and sticking through it and seeing it all the way through. Appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. And Kevin has my email address, and I'll reach out to him as this moves forward. I'm happy to be a resource and to the city as a community member and a resident of Indio.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate
Again,
that.
Brent. All right, Peter.
Okay, so now I am going to pass it on to Sherry, and Sherry, you can just tell me when to forward your slides to talk
Okay.
on market context.
Yes, thank you. So this is really, we've seen a lot about what the corridor and the neighborhoods adjacent could look like over time. And so now we want to talk a little bit about the market context and some of the expectations of timing for corridor development based on what we're seeing. Go ahead, Peter. Thank you. So what we're seeing is that there is demand for office space and there is demand for housing along the corridor, and it will continue to grow. The city of Indio is expecting, 15,000 new households or demand for new housing units, and the Greater Valley over 100,000 new housing units between now and the end of the planning horizon. Some of which the study area certainly can capture. And also even right now, or through the end of 2040, there's going to be demand for over 300,000 square feet of office space, 131,000 of which will be medical office space. And even more in the city of Indio, which could be captured. So there is demand going forward to fill in the Highway 111 corridor. At the moment, new development is going to be challenging without subsidies in the short term. Go ahead. And oh, I'm sorry, go back. And the reason for this is primarily, it's just that the rents right now aren't supporting ground up development, and the supply chain shortages have been exacerbating that. Construction costs in California have been going up faster than rents all across the state, so that even in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, you are seeing things that should be feasible becoming sort of marginally or maybe even not feasible. So in the short term, until things kind of level off with the construction and the supply chain, it might be a little bit challenging to actually see new development come out of the ground. So this is for housing and office. Retail we kept separately because retail competes on a much larger area than office and housing. What you see here is an outline of the city of Indio and the retail catchment for the area. And so we're looking at, where do people come from to do their shopping? And it differs by different products, but just to kind of see that thinking about retail just along the corridor, you really have to think about retail in this greater trade area context. Peter? So it's important to remember that new housing and office development help retail demand grow. And the reason is, right, that's kind of the rule of real estate is retail follows rooftops, meaning that retail needs shoppers to support it. And so adding the housing, adding office, which has workers who also will spend money along the corridor, is going to help strengthen and generate more demand for retail along the corridor. And in the meantime, as you were seeing in some of the pictures that Peter was presenting, where we were talking about those key nodes along the corridor, focusing that retail at those key intersections or those key nodes will help make it successful, because retail really does better when it's clustered together, which is why you have, lifestyle centers and shopping centers and that. And the early projects can create momentum. Go ahead. So what we're recommending to further the specific plan and get it implementable and on a path forward would be to allow partial development of sites at lower intensities to start building critical mass, as Peter was talking about earlier. And then as the markets catch up, it will redevelop at higher intensities. Encouraging development in areas of economic gravity. So Midtown, with the expansion of the JFK Hospital, that's an area of economic gravity. It pulls people in. The gateway to downtown, we just heard from Kevin that there's interest in downtown. We know that there are a lot of, the downtown specific plan has a lot of great plans. So strengthening that connection between downtown and the corridor. And then the opportunity zone, which happens to be in that area, provides incentives to investors. And so focusing on where there is economic gravity early is how you can get some of those wins. Another thing is, you know, even if construction costs are kind of out of whack for market rate uses, encouraging affordable housing projects, they have different financing structure. And so they can bring new development that that looks fresh and new to the corridor and start kind of generating some of that critical mass. And evaluate the potential for an EIFD, which is an enhanced infrastructure financing district, which is a property tax diversion, so tax increment financing, that the city will take the property tax increment and put it back into the corridor to help pay for improvements without adding cost to development, so that you're not kind of adding to that burden while market conditions are a little unfavorable. And we know that one of the keys to the specific plan is creating sustainable economic development. So we want to make the corridor a thriving place of commerce, entertainment, and employment. And we've been talking about what that will look like and how to do that. And so go ahead, Peter. So thinking about what are some of the improvements that can do that? Business oriented, so programs and projects that support local businesses would be street beautification, which you saw with the trees, and accessibility with the bike paths and the pedestrian ways, and the paseos, the ways to get around, visitor amenities, gathering places, providing small business support through technical assistance, coordinated marketing campaign, and then we have our workforce-oriented improvements. So providing broadband, which is already on the city's radar, so that you are providing citizens with the best opportunity to connect and build their skills, enhancing access to broadband, to education, to jobs, and even the active transportation improvements help workers get around to their jobs more easily. Looking at the industries along the corridor that we've talked about, healthcare, education, accommodation, and creating jobs in those, and then workforce development programs, which is a more citywide economic development program, but certainly would help the corridor as well. Peter? So the strategies for this, the city has a 2022 to 2024 strategic plan that highlights the Highway 111 corridor. One of those things is to complete and adopt this specific plan, but there are other elements to it as well. We think implementation of those strategies already identified is important. Strengthen partnerships with the county and local schools and hospitals for workforce development, and identify potential partnerships for internships in businesses and industries along the corridor. Adopt and implement a facade improvement program, so you beautify the businesses that are already there. And this one I think is also critical. Implement local hire targets for city-sponsored projects. So if there is affordable housing project, you know, have local hire requirements for the construction as much as that can come up. Leverage the opportunity zone designation on the east side of the corridor to attract investment. Consider incentives for new development that provide corridor-wide benefits. So fee credits, and we just heard streamlined permitting is already underway in the downtown and being planned for here. And then as market conditions change, you know, put programs in place that will give the developers expectations that they're going to have to sign developer agreements or community benefit agreements, you know, once the highway is kind of in transition and underway. And then And then identify state and regional infrastructure funding sources. There are several loan programs, active transportation programs to help pay for a lot of the improvements that we've been talking about in the public realm. Federal funding sources can also be applied to infrastructure programs or specific projects. There are economic development grants, tax credits for bringing in certain kind of businesses, and also for affordable housing, community development block grants. Those sources typically don't have a lot of money and do have a lot of demand, but they exist. Land and Water Conservation Fund has some elements of it that that could be used along Highway 111, and then the new ARPA and infrastructure bill grants. That's going to be putting quite a bit of money out there for improvements, particularly I think related to active transportation. So identifying those sources and tracking their funding cycles, and and timing improvements to that funding, and creating sources and uses to go after. So any questions about the market assessment or kind of the direction we're taking for the implementation plan?
Sherry, I don't see any questions in the Zoom Q&A nor on Zoom. So.
Okay, great. And I will remind everybody that that the city is actually in the middle of preparing a fiber and broadband master plan, and they've already brought their consultant on. So so that is underway as well. A lot of the economic development things that we're suggesting are, they apply to the corridor, but they're also citywide. And so so thinking, so for instance, the broadband, a citywide master plan is probably the better way to go. But we'll incorporate that. And so that's it.
But for sure, that broadband piece is critically important.
Yes.
We've been speaking with a lot of people in a lot of cities, and there's this general eastward drift of business and employment away from the coasts, as the coasts get more and more overpriced. And as people have learned through the pandemic that you don't necessarily have to live where the corporate office is. And so we think that generates a huge window of opportunity for places like Indio, the Inland Empire, the Sacramento area, where if you've got fast internet, you're in the game. And if you don't, you're not.
Right. Absolutely. And it also, I think, speaks to equity issues when there's been, remote learning, and people who have access to the internet and people who don't have access to the internet. It's exacerbated some of those issues. So absolutely, it's very critical. It's critical infrastructure at this point.
Yes.
Yep.
It's rapidly becoming more critical than some of the mobility infrastructure, because you just don't have to go there so much. You can live.
Peter, do you have final comments, or we turn it back to Kevin?
Yeah, that's all we have. So we can pass it back to Kevin.
Kevin?
Sorry about that. We had a blip here. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Well, first of all, thank you for those that did join us this evening and participated in this, either directly on the Zoom or on our social media. We do appreciate it. We know we're taking time out of people's busy schedules, and it's the holiday season. So thank you for your time. I wanted to point out that this project is being funded by a state grant. So we have a $310,000 state grant that's funding this project. And so the citizens' tax dollars are not directly contributing to this or a general fund. And we're getting the benefit of support from the state on preparing this plan. The team is looking forward to developing the draft documents. And as Peter talked about earlier in the meeting, we hope to have those documents out to you in early 2022. Just for those that are interested and want to look at those documents, they'll be available on the city website, and we'll be notifying interested folks who have signed up, and we'll also be doing social media posts and things like that. So stay tuned. Some more exciting information to come. The plan will start to take shape, and you'll have an opportunity to give us your thoughts and ideas on that. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules, and have a great evening and a good holiday season, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.